recording the first portion of this training from 9 to 10 for people who could not attend. So if you don't mind clicking that you got that, that'd be great. So as you all know, my name is Margaret, and I have salt and pepper hair, maybe a little bit more salt than pepper. It's shoulder length, and I am wearing green glasses. I'm also wearing a fresh coat of Romance Mauve by CoverGirl, if you're wondering the sheen of my lip balm. During this presentation, feel free to raise your hand or ask any questions in a chat, or get up and stretch or move around if you need to stimulate yourself in some shape or form. This presentation, as I said, is being recorded. And I do have digitally accessible transcripts of our script. Should you wish to receive a copy, just let us know. Elise, oh, actually, I'm going to share this. I messed up. On the screen, hang on one second. I have to share my screen. I have a little bit going on here. Forgive me. Elise, can you read what's on the screen? Because I had to hide my script.
Sure, you want me to read the slide?
Read it from the script in front of you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So on the screen is an image showing an increase in the number of people with vision loss growing from 2020 to 2050. It highlights the growth in 4 categories: full blindness, moderate to severe, mild, and nearsightedness. So this shows a projected increase of 60%. The global population is predicted to grow by 25% by 2050, reaching 9.7 billion. By 2050, the number of people over 65 will almost double.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. So thank you. So this slide is showing a 60% projected increase of people with vision loss from now until 2050. And I did get that information from Learning Technologies, and I personally think the number is staggering. And as Elise referred to, one of the key drivers for this is aging and the number of people over the age of 65. Elise, does it say that there will be one in how many over the age of 65?
It says from 1 in 11 people to 1 in 6 people.
Right, in the next, by 2050. And then the other reason that is driving this increase of people with vision loss is lifestyle changes. People are living more sedentary lifestyles. They're using their phones. Nutrition in food is changing. Diabetes will grow. Myopia in eyes will grow. And so this is a huge trend that we will see happening in regards to vision loss in the next couple of years. Any questions on this graph? Okay, thanks. And let me stop sharing and go back. Sorry, I'm a little great. So Elise will put the link to that data that we just shared with you in the chat box. And I also wanted to mention, in addition to the increase in the number of people with vision problems by the year 2050 by 60%, Learning Technology also shared that 21st century learners use different technology to learn. They quoted that 25% of community college students use their phones to learn. And accessible documents work on phones. And so COD, the Online Writing Center Association, which is something we're all a part of, are taking steps to proact as opposed to react to these changing trends in students and the population with vision loss. So the Learning Commons got involved in Ally, which is a course used to learn about digital accessibility in about 2018, when COD went ahead and piloted the self-guided Ally course. And if you haven't taken the self-guided Ally course, you can sign up for it by writing learningtech@cod.edu to be added to the course. All the WRSA coaches have taken it, and every time we hire a new employee, they are asked to take it. And guys, it doesn't take more than 1 or 2 hours, right? Yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of have to go back to. Like you learn it and you know what's there and you can click on a lot of things, but it's really great to have at your fingertips. So when I say digital accessibility, I'm talking about digital documents, spaces, and services that can be navigated by disabled people. So a few examples include written content and visuals that can be read by screen readers, text-to-speech software, or similar programs like that. I'm talking about spaces that can be navigated by keyboard keys instead of a mouse. I'm talking about transcripts and captions for audio or video content. I'm talking about visual explanations of complex processes or information. I'm talking about high contrast or color in images and presentations. And I'm talking about information that is not conveyed only in color. So I want to sort of give you a preview of what we're referring to when we're talking about digital accessibility. And at least put those in the chat box as well. So the principles we're going to be diving into this semester are primarily for disabled people who are blind and have vision impairment and are using screen readers or text-to-speech software to read digital content. These basic principles are relevant to all of us, every single person in this Zoom, in many digital contexts, including presentation materials, as we know from our mini modules, conferences, webinars, workshops, online feedback that you might provide writers, maybe even people who reach out to the Learning Commons as a whole, handouts, templates, resources that you share, handbooks, training materials, other internal documents, meeting agendas, emails you send every day, websites, any classes, modules, or posts in Blackboard, your scheduling system perhaps, and any posts in social media. So hopefully you can identify that this is relevant to all of us here today. And anything that is created digitally should really apply these principles when the technology platform allows. Any questions so far? So after COVID and our growing involvement with the online community of the Online Writing Center Association, Elise and I felt compelled for our WRSA staff to take small steps towards learning more. So many of us participated in this phenomenal webinar through Online Writing Center called Introduction to Digital Accessibility Principles. And the link to the recorded webinar is in the chat. It's wildly helpful. I have created a lot of resources based on what we learned, including the slides from this particular training session that you will have access to. So last year at this time, everyone in WRSA was asked to take the Blackboard Self-Guided Ally class and spend some time getting good at making one type of resource accessible. It could have been an academic poster, it could have been a Word document, it could have been a video, it could have been whatever you wanted. We just started small because this is hard to learn. I think, am I right, WRSA folks? There's a lot of layers, but once you get it, it becomes very second nature. Remember when we started learning how to design PowerPoint slides? And now it's like just how we think, right? We kind of bleed good design. this is what the hope is will happen. So this past summer, Amy, wave your hand, Amy. Thank you. She graciously agreed to join the Online Writing Center Association team to help them draft their official statement on accessibility. So they were like, you know what? We have to make an official statement about this. That's how important it is to us. And when Amy started to do it with them, we were like, well, it's important to us too. Clearly, we started to work on it last year. And so she started to help us sort of draft one for our particular area. And so then we got to talking to Jenny and Bridget and Jane, our boss. And we were like, really the whole Learning Commons could get on board with this, because we all make flyers and we all make workshops and we all email and we all are involved in the website. And so we decided as a whole to have a Learning Commons accessibility statement based off Amy's work with the original one. So thank you for that, Amy. That was a huge help for us and we really appreciate it. And so Jenny is going to share, I know I shared it to many of you during finals week to take a look at, but Jenny's going to share it again briefly in a second. But I want to, before I have Jenny do that, kind of provide you with a list of accessibility practices that I tried today that I'm hoping you'll try the next time you have a workshop. One of the things I did was I described what I look like at the beginning of the presentation. 2 is I told you how you could participate, and I welcomed stimming or getting up and stimulating yourself. 3, I provided a transcript and presentation materials should you wish it. 4, I verbally described the image, or Elise did. 5, if there were discussion prompts and instructions, I would have done that. At this point, we aren't doing that. And then if there were any comments or questions in the chat, I would have taken the time to have done that. And so maybe kind of keep this list of accessibility practices nearby and take a stab of trying to implement 1 or 2 of them the next time you have an online workshop or mini module. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenny now, and she's going to share the Learning Commons statement on accessibility for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be at this meeting. My name is Jenny. I have dark brown hair. It's about medium length past my shoulders, and I'm wearing a green sweater and black jacket. When you talk about age, when you're describing yourself, if you do that, you're supposed to do it in decades. So I'm in my 30s, but I'm glad this meeting is today because I wouldn't be able to say that probably in about 2 or 3 weeks from now. So thank you for scheduling it for today. And I work with Bridget Clark, who you probably know. We're kind of in the middle section of the Learning Commons next to WRSA, kind of set back from math assistance. Our focus is on supporting students with disabilities and accommodations, and also to support Learning Commons staff too in accessibility initiatives and direct work with students too. So I'm really excited about the work that Margaret and Elise and you as WRSA coaches are doing and spearheading this effort. It's really exciting, and I appreciate that you're allowing me to participate in this process. And my role today is to briefly show you where to find the accessibility commitment, and then to kind of give some thoughts on it. I'm not going to walk through it word for word. I know a number of you have read through it already, but please feel free, as Margaret said, if you have questions as we go along, to put them in the chat box, to walk around, to move as you need to. I'll be relatively brief, but feel free to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and take you. Okay, are you seeing the Learning Commons website? Okay, good, perfect. Okay, so you're probably pretty familiar with the location of the accessibility commitment. So we have the, on the Learning Commons main webpage, the 3 areas of the Learning Commons. And then right underneath that is the link for anti-racism and inclusivity resources. And we really felt like it fit here because it talks about creating a more inclusive environment in the Learning Commons overall. So we have it under there. I'm going to click on that and then show you it's at the very top because alphabetically that's where it works. And so this is where you would go if you want to find the commitment to accessibility statement. And then I'm going to click on it so we can take a look at it. Some of the things that I wanted to mention, the first thing is in the introduction, when you have a chance to look at it, is you'll see it's linked to COD's equity statement, and it also further down connects to the Learning Commons mission statement. So we wanted to make sure when we were putting this together that what we were saying and committing to really aligned with what the institution is saying about equity, what the Learning Commons is saying, and that we were kind of in line with the values of COD and the Learning Commons as well. So we wanted to connect that at the beginning. And then when we go down to our bullet points are actually separated into three kind of different areas. We have the first area is kind of our broad overall commitments. And then we have a section on commitments of staff and commitments related to the Learning Commons environment overall. And then we have a section at the bottom that is more about student roles. We felt like it was important to define and talk about that aspect of it. So the first two bullet points are broad commitments. It just talks about our commitment to fostering accessibility, just in all areas, resources, sessions, staff training, engagement with students, things like that. And then noting our desire to listen to students with diverse abilities and to help meet their needs, to take action when we get feedback from them, and to foster an environment that's inclusive of students and employees. And when we started, we were really focusing on the student aspect of it because a lot of what we do is to serve students, but it's also important to make sure that employees are included too. So digital accessibility and improving that will help with both of those areas. The middle part is staff commitments and the Learning Commons environment. Some of them apply to you directly in whatever position you're in. Some are probably more relevant to people in supervisory roles or talk about hiring practices. So they might not all apply to you directly, but it's important to have it in there. So we're talking about acknowledging and adapting to diverse and complex backgrounds and identities of students, employees, having a no tolerance policy on discrimination so that it's a safe space for everyone. We talk about hiring practices, professional development opportunities, self-assessment, critical reflection, and taking steps as we learn accessibility principles. And then the final part in the bullet points is what we're encouraging students to do, to self-advocate, which is something that we're always encouraging students to do in our work in a lot of areas. We're inviting them to self-disclose if they are connected to the Center for Access and Accommodations and receive accommodations. It's clearly up to them whether they decide to do that, but we want to give them the opportunity and allow them to benefit from that. And then talking about the responsibility for work completion is the students, while we as staff are committed to being responsive to where they are in their learning process and supporting them in that. So that is just kind of a basic overview of the specific commitments we made and how we were thinking about grouping them. And then the last page is a list of different documents, campus resources, and campus offices. And this is just to recognize that this is really a collaborative effort. We're working together as staff in the Learning Commons and with other COD areas to support students, reduce obstacles for students, and help them to access the learning environment and our materials and things like that. So you'll see it's got COD's mission statement, Learning Commons policies, different resources, and then the three main offices are the Center for Student Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Center for Access and Counseling and Advising, which is down farther. At the very bottom, we have a note because we want people to have an opportunity and a way to give us feedback and suggestions in our steps toward accessibility. So we have that listed there, and then the Learning Commons email address that people can use if they want to go ahead and offer us feedback. I will note that we did put this document through the Microsoft Word accessibility checker and the Ally accessibility checker, and it came out with high scores on those. It has things like, the headings in it. It's got bulleted lists using the systems, the way that the system, not the system, the software is built. And so we took steps like that to make sure that our statement was also accessible. And I think the last thing that I just wanted to kind of reiterate that Margaret was talking about is that digital accessibility in general, it's never kind of a one and done thing. It's a learning process. And hopefully that's encouraging for you. I mean, it can be nice to just do things and have them finished, but what it means is there are a lot of pieces to accessibility. So it's okay to make sure that we're being proactive and taking steps, but to learn it a little bit at a time, like different steps at different times, and kind of build on our ability to do this. And it will become more second nature as we go along. And the Learning Commons changing their name and their branding in the next couple of semesters is a really good time to do this, because we're going to have to change all of our marketing materials anyways. So there will be opportunities in the future kind of for training and things like that. But that's mainly what I wanted to go over. But I did want to leave it open. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I wanted to leave it open in case there were any questions that you wanted to put in the chat, or if you wanted to raise your hand before we move to Kate's part. Or Margaret, if there's anything else you wanted to say. No, you're good? Okay.
Jenny, I'm sorry, could you pull it up one more time?
Oh, yeah.
All the
Yeah.
resources. I just want to point out the website, the name of the website that Jenny and Bridget did create within the past year, the Learning Commons Neurodiversity Resources and Supports for Students with Disabilities. Since this is still kind of relatively new, I just want to encourage everyone during downtime, check out this website. They've done such a good job compiling resources and putting together helpful information that is just really founded on the populations that we work with and we see on a daily basis. So during your downtime, please check out that website if you haven't already.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. I sent some of that information to my brother who has a special needs son in college. So that's just great information for universally. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Kate, if you go ahead and take over from here.
Okay, I will
Right.
stop. Sorry.
Share my screen.
There you go. Okay.
I have too many windows open. Hang on. Here we go. So good morning, everyone. I'm Kate. I have brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and beige cat-eye glasses, and I'm wearing a brown turtleneck sweater. So I was tasked with turning the accessibility statement into an infographic to hang in our spaces, mostly for students. And so this is that draft version of the accessibility statement that Jenny just went over. It's been through a number of draft versions. I think this is like the 4th or 5th one that we've sort of landed on for now. It is mostly accessible. It follows most of our accessibility sort of suggestions as far as design goes. It is an accessible palette. It uses accessibly sized fonts, with the exception of that link at the bottom, which is very small, and font styles. So yeah, this is it. It's still sort of in progress, especially with the Learning Commons name change. It's gonna have to accommodate that at some point, and so it is color coded based on sort of who the sort of statement is is directed towards. I don't know how to explain that. So the light blue under listen to students, name and address a disability discrimination and foster accessibility, that last piece. That's one category. That was staff specific. Learn continuously, reflect critically, and encourage self-advocacy were sort of the broadest, I think, goals that we had. Am I right about that? Am I mixing them up? And then the darkest blue were specifically like student responsibilities or student kind of expectations. So the QR code links directly to the document, to the PDF that's on the website, as does the URL at the bottom. It is not currently hyperlinked, but it will be when it goes live on the website. I think that's everything on this, unless I missed anything.
Kate, beautiful. Another terrific infographic. Thank you so much.
So it's not live on the website yet, but will be at some point, right? So yeah.
We do have a question.
Okay.
It's not clear to me what name and address disability discrimination means. Can you speak to that a little bit? Or Jenny?
I can. I got this. This is a little bit more verbose a statement than our anti-racism and inclusivity statement was, and so a lot of the drafting had to do with finding a way to say what we needed to say in as few words as possible to make it fit in this like puzzle that is created in this infographic. And so that is part of a much longer bullet point, if I'm remembering correctly, on the actual statement. And so if that's not like landing correctly in the infographic, then we'll have to, I think, go back to the drawing board on the language that we're like condensing it down to. Am I understanding that correctly?
Jenny, do you want to?
Yeah. So it is part of a longer bullet point where it's just talking about our zero tolerance policy on disability discrimination. So what it's trying to say is that if yes, let me do that.
Yes, I'll share it.
Do that again. Do you have it, Kate, or you want me to?
Oh wait, Andrew, do you want the infographic one or do you want the text?
Infographic.
Oh, infographic. Never mind. That's
yeah.
Sorry, I guess I could have unmuted myself.
Yeah, there we go.
And is it confusing to you because it says name and address as like a home address, or is what is the confusion? And that could just be.
Are you suggesting that somebody should be indicating their name and address?
Okay.
I think what you want
to
say is something like identify and address disability discrimination, because I'm still not getting exactly what you're referencing here.
Or even if even if address wasn't all in bold, would that help you, Anne?
No.
No?
When you say name and address, I'm thinking name and address on a form.
I agree with you in like a very weird way.
I'm gonna gatekeep here because there's a lot to talk about.
Okay.
We hear the concern. And we will make the change to make that clear. Identify sounds like a very good option.
Yeah. Canva was also very confused when I tried to search for graphics for naming and addressing. Canva was giving me all kinds of weird like contact card kind of graphics, which was not what we were talking about. So you're not the only one, I think, who could be confused by that language.
I want to move on to some of the nuts and bolts of what we'll be doing this semester. So I want to be cognizant of time. And so we spent like the first half of this portion talking about really the relevance and the need for this type of knowledge and continuous training. It's very humbling and it's very hard. But it's very rewarding, and even if we're helping just one person, we're doing our job, right? So I'm going to move on to some of the nuts and bolts of what we will be doing related to this. So let me move my mouse here. So those of us in writing, reading, speech assistants are have received this during last finals week, but we are going to be spending time in this document. The rest of you who were invited to the meeting today, you would find this link in today's meeting invite. Okay, so you can open this and maybe bookmark it or figure out a way for you to remember how to circle back to this. And it does have a link to Jenny's, what Jenny referred to of our Learning Commons statement on accessibility. And it talks about the self-guided Blackboard class. So again, if you haven't taken the self-guided Blackboard class, this is what it's called, and this is how you would see it in Blackboard. And you would just write learning technologies to be added to that course. And you can go back to it often, and it's very helpful to have in your Blackboard. So what we've done as a team is there's a few of us sort of ahead of the game, not in any great weight or shape, but a little bit ahead of the game than all of you. And we have started to create links of resources created are related to specific types of documents that we might create in our area. So for example, if we were creating a Microsoft Word, this is a wonderful document you might like to refer to about how to make a digitally accessible Word document. And this came from that OWCA webinar. It discusses how do you create headings? How do you create lists? How do you describe your hyperlinks? Think about a digital reader who has to read a hyperlink on a piece of paper. You have to describe it in a certain way for the digital reader to be able to read it. How to write alternative text. If there's an image on your document, you need to tell the digital reader what the image is. I didn't do a good job explaining alternative text versus image descriptions. This is more image descriptions. Help me out, WRSA. Jessica, help me out with alt text, make that articulate.
Yeah, so alt text is used when the student has a digital copy of the document and the alt text reads aloud what you have like software linked into the description as, whereas image description is what you type out in the body of the document and it can be seen and read by a screen reader, whether it's on a piece of paper or it's accessed digitally. It's not part of the coding, it's just part of the text of the document. And that's used for usually more lengthy explanations.
Thank you, Jess. And there's exercises in here and examples and how do I write alt text. Do not begin with phrases like image of or photo of. It tells you what to say, what not to say. You can practice. It's wildly helpful. And so hopefully you'll find other ones. This is the slideshow from that that includes their notes from the presentation. Bunch of tips. When Jenny talked about this being continuous, all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, we create Google documents. How do you make them accessible? So that's like a whole other can of worms because Google works differently than Word, right? And so we went and found resources on that. And so this is going to be a live document. And as you are working on creating one Word document or revising one you've already done. So for example, the one I did last year at this time was our meet and greet script that we do. We had a blind student go to Anne's meet and greet, and it was the true false game. Or it might have even been Kahoot. I can't remember which one it was. Regardless, they could not see anything that Anne was showing. We did not know there was going to be a blind student in the session, but it became very important to me that we had a digitally accessible script that we could give a student either before if we know they're coming or afterwards if we knew they were there, so that they could have all WRSA's resources at their fingertips. So you can take a document that you've already created. You don't have to start from scratch, and just make sure it's accessible. And you could go back to the Blackboard or Ally class for help, or you could use any of these. And again, we welcome all highly vetted resources to be added to this list. This is a list that we are going to give new hires and continually train people on and learn from one another on. So make this live. The next type of resource that we are going to ask WRSA folks to create is, or revise, is an infographic or academic poster. So I went ahead and I did remember that first time we did a CTM and we created an infographic when we were learning how to do infographics? Well, I took my old infographic and I got a horrible score for contrast when I ran it through Ally. And I was like, oh, that's embarrassing. But we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, right? There's a lot to learn. And so I just took that old infographic from the continuous training module we did 2 years ago. You're welcome to do that. You don't have to create a new academic poster or infographic. Again, here's a bunch of links that could support you in this process. We wrote down that this was an advanced resource. Kate knows the most about these resources, so feel free to reach out to Kate if you have them. She's going to do some quick tips shortly to sort of talk about this that might be of help to you on a very beginning level. The third thing that really a lot of us in our area have worked on, because we have made all of our mini modules digitally accessible. All of our slides, all of our scripts, all of our handouts are now digitally accessible. But this is related to PowerPoint slides. This talks about order of elements, principles, quick reference guides, etc. Again, I invite you to add hot links. You don't need to run it by us. If you think everybody could benefit from that, if you find something different, feel free to add it here. This list will grow and this will become the master list for everybody. And then finally, the fourth thing that we are going to do as a WRSA family is we are going to learn how to put closed captioning on videos. Several of us have already created videos. They're in our YouTube playlists. And Jessica made this amazing 8-minute video on how to put closed captioning on videos. I really think you'll get all your answers in 8 minutes on how to do it. If you don't, Jessica knows how to do it. Arena knows how to do it. I know how to do it. Elise knows how to do it. So there's a few people. Kate knows how to do it. And so think about a video that maybe you created for one of our training that's in our playlist on YouTube, or something. I know, Andrew, you've got one to redo in a mini module. You could use that one. And let's add some closed captioning to that. Okay, so you will be spending the next couple of months until June 30th, the WRSA family will, creating or revising 4 documents and making sure they're digitally accessible. This is really important to do, as people have been saying, in light of the changes to the Learning Commons name, and just because we want to be a culture where people feel accepted and welcome. So in each of your personal folders, you are going to find a document like this, and you are going to be asked to create a Word doc and put it in your folder and put the link to your Word doc in your chart. While you're building it, if you're like, oh, I should have done this from the beginning, or I learned this and this would be helpful for everybody, feel free to put a tip in the next time you create a Word doc that's accessible. Do the same for an infographic link, your PowerPoint link, and your 3-minute or 6-minute, whatever minute video. The object of the game is not to create a video. It's just to learn how to do closed captioning. And so, you know, don't worry. Don't spend a lot of time on a video. You could record. Yeah, I'm not going to go too much into that. Let me show you your personal folder real fast. I'll just go with Amy since it's alphabetical. And folks who are here and not doing this, bear with us for a second. So I wrote Accessibility CTM 2023 here. The only thing in your folder right now is this chart. And this is Amy's chart. It's got Amy's name. You all have a separate name, so it doesn't look like duplicates in OneDrive. This is where Amy will, you know, she will add her finished Word doc and her finished PowerPoint and her finished whatever here, and then she'll put her hot links in this chart. Okay, and then we're going to use this chart when we get together in August. We're going to combine all the tips. We're going to talk about our experience, and we're going to wrap up what we have done so far. It won't mean that we're done, because we are constantly learning. But that is basically what we're doing. So you're going to create a link from your OneDrive, and then you're going to put the format in here, and then you're going to fill in any bulleted tips on suggestions for future uses. Down below, you'll see an example, and you're going to share this completed piece of paper with Elise and me by June 30th, 2023. And then we'll talk about it at our August staff meeting. So this is how long it's going to take. And whenever we do training, we want you to enjoy it, right? And obviously students come first, and so we're working with students. And just keep in touch on your process and your progress. And we'll try to possibly do Accessibility Palooza in May, when we don't have as many hours available because of the break like we did last year. I think that's going to work out. So if for some reason you need to wrap up loose ends, we'll do that in May. But during these first 2 weeks of the semesters, definitely start looking at resources. Think about which Word document you want to revise. Think about which infographic you're going to revise, etc. Okay, and then Kate has finished her chart. And so the finished chart will look something like this. So there's a hot link to her Word document, and she sort of had some tips here. And then this is her hot link for her infographic, her PowerPoint, and this is a link to her YouTube that has closed captioning. So in terms of nuts and bolts, WRSA folks, does this make sense? If not, put it in the chat box or raise your hand or speak. Okay.
Margaret, we do have one question.
Okay, sure.
Since we're using materials that already exist someplace else, can we name these versions in our folders in a way that identifies them in particular?
Yeah, I would. So then there's not duplicates in OneDrive. I think that's a great suggestion. Whoever asked that, I love it.
It was
Other
our
questions?
doctor.
Yeah, that
Who
was
was
me.
it?
It was
The
our
doctor.
doctor.
Yeah.
I just want
Was
to make,
it a could we or a should we?
well, it was, can we talk about how we might do that? So, so that things,
No, it's a great idea.
Yeah, okay, all right,
Because
okay.
otherwise there'll be duplicates.
okay.
Okay, so I'm cognizant of time, and WRSA folks, we might go back to that in the next half of the meeting, but I want to give Kate time to talk about some quick tips, some practical 5,000 feet, let's get started type of things that might be of help to everybody. Okay?
There's another question from Julie in the chat.
Okay, what is it?
Does it matter which material we choose, or if someone else chose the same document?
Doesn't matter. The whole goal is to learn.
All right, I'm gonna share the screen again. So one of the things that Margaret and I talked about as I was kind of working through that chart with documents that I had already created was just like the need for some kind of a checklist or something to kind of refer to as you're working on it, so that you don't forget some of these things that, at least for me, like in infographics, it kind of is second nature. I'm sure for Jess, like when she's doing captioning, some of it's second nature, but it's always nice to have like a checklist to kind of refer back to just make sure you haven't missed anything. And so we put together, these are linked in that CTM document. These are quick reference checklists or just quick reference bookmarks. We're working on getting them printed, I think, at some point to put in the cubes. Admittedly, the font on these is a little bit small. So you're going to want to access the digital versions of these that are on OneDrive and then zoom in on them because I just couldn't get everything into one infographic in a larger font. But it has the main kind of categories to consider as you're designing and just reminders about how to keep that as accessible as possible. And then there's notes at the bottom of both. This is for the PowerPoint. And then there's also the same kind of note at the bottom of the infographic one about color and about contrast. As Margaret already kind of mentioned, the contrast piece is the hardest piece, I think. Which is interesting because I think we're kind of surrounded by contrast things, challenges all day long. but we don't always kind of layer those on top of what we're doing in terms of design. So I'm going to show some real life examples of some contrast challenges, and then we'll talk about how you can accommodate those or solve those in your document designs. So this is the infographic one. Like I said, it looks pretty similar. If you get into the bullet points is where it gets into more details about like how you're actually going to do that in whatever design system you're using. And then the last bookmark is specifically on contrast and color. And so it has a definition of contrast, which I think is worth kind of pointing out, which is contrast is the difference in light between whatever you have in the foreground, which for us is mostly text, right? And whatever color is existing in your background. So on this one, the foreground is white and the background is navy blue. And so I have two examples there. It might be hard to see. Let's see if I can zoom in. There we go. So this combination, white font on a navy background, is considered high contrast. It's considered that by Ally. It's also considered it by Word. Any kind of those accessibility checks are looking for that in contrast, right? The difference between the background and the foreground. And then the combination of blue font on a navy background is considered low contrast. When you print this, you can hardly see that text. It completely disappears off of the bookmark. So that is sort of the simplest example that you're going to get of contrast. But in terms of like color combinations, you'll want to like go back to the color wheel from, like third grade art class and start looking at colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel to create the highest contrast. I think it's important here to talk about, like, we're not talking about the colors in connection with one another. We're talking about them in connection with the background. So if the colors are not high contrast to one another, like in this case, red and blue, like here, sort of in that first color palette, sorry, my Zoom thing is covering it. Letter A, right, in those color palettes. So like blue and red might not be super high contrast, but they are high contrast to the white. So if they're not high contrast to one another, that's okay. They just need to be high contrast to the background color. So you can see letter D, that yellow at the very bottom of D is kind of fading out. And that's because that is the color palette that I'm using on these bookmarks. So it has a dark background and those colors are supposed to be sitting on top of it, but it's hard to see that on that with that little palette. What you see on the bottom row is what those color palettes would look like for, this is red colorblind. And so it gives you a sense then of how that's going to, how the color blindness might affect the contrast. So I don't know if that all makes sense, but that's sort of the basics of this one. All of that to say, some of the advanced tools that we put on that list have to do with converting things into these different color palettes and then checking the contrast on those. And that's not something that I think you need to worry about right away, right? I think you set your palette for your infographic, you start working through it, and your singular goal is high contrast. And then you run it through a color blindness checker, or you change it to see the colorblind palette, and then you make adjustments from there. But if you are working with the goal of high contrast in mind, it's going to solve a lot of problems for you kind of at the outset. So like I mentioned, one of the things that is interesting about contrast for me is that like we're constantly kind of dealing with it in regular life. And so I'm going to share some photos here. I was at my son's middle school basketball game, and where is it? Here it is. They were playing against a team with, can everyone see the picture? With these uniforms. And I'm not sitting very far from the student. I have blurred everybody out, but I'm not sitting that far from the student. I'm on short bleachers, so I'm probably, I don't know, less than 10 feet from the back of the student's jersey. And I could barely read this number. He's number 25 in case you can't tell. But there's no contrast here, right? It's very, very low contrast uniforms. And so even the referees were struggling with these uniforms that day. They were trying to call fouls or just trying to do calls on the other team, and they couldn't see the numbers. They had to have the student walk to them, look at their jersey like right in front of them, and then send them back into the game so that they could make these calls. They were playing against my son's team, and I'm going to show you their jerseys, which is a very big difference in terms of contrast. I'm the same distance from these students as I was from the other ones, and I can read all three of their numbers really clearly in this picture. And so you can see the difference that contrast can make in those kinds of things. If you ever find yourself like sort of squinting at things, right, or having to get a lot closer to them to see what's happening, to read text, to understand sort of like an advertisement or a sign in the grocery store or something like that, it usually has something to do with contrast, right? Because it's not popping off the page in the way that you need it to. So there are checkers for this. There are ways that we can accommodate this. The contrast checker that is on the CTM document is a good one to use. It's just, it turns everything to grayscale and then it does a contrast check, but it's really meant for web designers. So it's difficult to sort of navigate. You have to like tell it what background colors you want it to read and tell it what foreground colors you want it to read. And that can get cumbersome and complicated. So instead, you can change your entire screen to grayscale and then just view things that way. And that makes contrast a real obvious thing. And so, for example, in black and white photography, right, you are constantly taking photographs with the intention of high contrast. You're looking for shadows and highlights in black and white photography. And so you can always kind of tell when a photograph has been changed from color to black and white because it loses that high contrast that exists. So this is a high contrast black and white photograph. It was taken in black and white. And so you can see very dark blacks and very white whites. In comparison to that, right? Here's a low contrast photograph. It is taken in color for all the cat people in the audience. So you're looking for opportunities to do that. And one of the ways, like I said, that you can start to look at that is by changing the contrast of your own screen and changing it to grayscale. So there are instructions for how to do this in a lot of the resources that we already have if you're working on a PC. But if you're working on a Mac, it's a little bit more complicated. So I find that Macs are really good as far as accessibility goes for screen readers. They have an embedded screen reader in the Macs that is not bad. And is really, it's like a command shift something to get it started and to turn it off. And so it's really easy to do that kind of thing. It's a little bit harder to adjust grayscale on your screen. So I'm going to walk everybody through how to do that. If you're using a Mac, this is how you would go about changing things to grayscale, so you can kind of check the contrast in kind of an informal way as you're working in your document. You can also use it to adjust the contrast of your screen overall, which I have found myself doing before, just so that it makes it easier for me to read my own computer screen. So system preferences. Under system preferences, you're going to go to accessibility, which has the sort of universal symbol for accessibility. In case anybody didn't know, that's that's kind of replacing the handicap symbol. We use this, you see this on websites and things like that. So you click on accessibility, and then you're going to go to display. And the Mac that I use at the Mac desktop that I use has this in a slightly different place, but on this computer, I'm on a MacBook. It has used grayscale, and you can see it turns my whole screen gray, or maybe you can't see that it turns my whole screen gray. Here, I'll show you my whole screen. So you can see my whole screen has gone grayscale here. So any program that I'm in, you can't see it. Okay. Let's try again.
It still was showing some color.
Okay. Here, I'll go back into the bookmark and maybe that will work. Yes, no?
No.
Still in color.
It's hard
Well,
to do.
it's grayscale for me.
Yeah, it's hard to
Everybody
do
looks like they're on black and white
technologically with Zoom
television
and all
on
your
my Zoom
screens.
screen.
Yeah.
So it will turn it grayscale, and then you can navigate whatever your documents are in whatever program they're in. So this is great if you're using like Canva and PowerPoint and other programs like on your desktop, because you can do all of the grayscale at once as opposed to having to go in and do them in separate programs. So where does that leave us? What kinds of questions do people have about how to use grayscale or about contrast? I have lots more examples if people want to see them, but I know that we're kind of running short on time, so I didn't want to.
I do feel like it would be helpful if you keep talking, Kate. For those people who have to leave at 9, that's okay.
Okay.
And I'm willing to do this if you aren't technologically ready. I would like to show an example of how to create grayscale on our computers at work and what that looks like for an image.
Okay.
Even though we have a link, just to sort of demonstrate that.
Yeah.
So those who can stay. Those who need to leave, we completely understand.
I wanted to show one more example of like the high contrast, low contrast thing. So COD's website is a good example of sort of making do with high contrast. So if you, I don't know who has it like sort of pulled up on their desktop, I can pull it up on mine. But even the main screen, they have white text layered over a green background. And so even when you do like a drop down, the drop-down menu still maintains like a dark background with a very light text over top of it. So it is pretty easy to read, which is surprising because there's lots of images going on, especially when you do those drop-downs, you have that image behind it and then you have the background, but you're still able to read it. I was thinking about it in comparison to, these were the t-shirts this year. Does everyone remember these? This is not the highest contrast option for t-shirts. If you remember, there was another version, it was green with the black logo on top. That is a much higher contrast than this version, which has the black with the green, which in some lighting kind of fades out a little bit. Other ones so one of the things that happened when I was doing my CTM for that sample chart was I looked back at the changes that we made to the APA color palette on that infographic, and I kind of pull it up to show everybody. That infographic went through, I can't tell you how many drafts in the original version, and then when we started running it through Ally, and when I put it through a contrast checker, there were entire sections of it that were unreadable, because that's how low the contrast was when we put it in there. And so some of it was important information, some of it wasn't. And so it was kind of, we had to make decisions about like what we were going to prioritize in terms of the design versus what information needed to be shared within that infographic. And so I'll give you the example of that. Let me pull that up here. I have to remember where it is. Hang on. Maybe I'll just do it through Canva. I have it here somewhere. Hang on a second. Margaret, do you want to do the how you change to grayscale on a PC while I look for it? Thank you.
Margaret, you're on mute.
I'm going to go down to the bottom left corner of the control panel. And you all can see that pop up, right? Like what my options are. You're on mute now.
No, we still see the number of people with vision loss slide.
Okay. Well, okay, so I am pulling up that control panel in the bottom left corner, and I'm going to type the word gray because that makes sense to me. And when I type the word gray, the command that it gives me is turn color filters on or off. So I'm going to click on that. I don't know if it's going to work because Kate's having issues too. I'm going to turn it off. And now is my screen gray to you? It's still color. So apparently we can't do this in Zoom.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is weird. And we didn't know that. We apologize. But it's super easy. We're happy to answer any questions or demonstrate this. But when you implement that grayscale, you automatically get that visceral effect like you did when you saw people design slides and you're like, oh my gosh, that hurts my ears. And that's what will happen. So if you find Kate's recommendations for how to set up your color palette and whatever, if you find that kind of daunting, don't worry about it. What's going to happen is this is going to become second nature because you're going to feel the colors. Like when you pick the wrong paint choice for your house, you're going to feel it. You're going to go, I can tell that contrast is wrong. And I'm going to put on grayscale and I'm going to see what a colorblind person might see, or I'm going to see the difference between my background and my foreground. And I'm going to go, that's not enough. I remember Kate saying this. I need to make changes. Even if you don't know what change to make, try something that instinctually makes sense to you. And then turn on the grayscale and see what happens there. You'll get better at it.
You're going to become me at the middle school basketball.
Yeah, you're going to be taking.
I know what's wrong with these uniforms.
From the sideline.
Okay,
and taking pictures of infographics at grocery stores.
That's right. Okay, I found the ones.
Okay, go ahead and take over.
Okay, so this was the original APA infographic, and so I'll talk about maybe one of the issues that came up, and then if anybody wants to kind of like guess at what the other issues were, we can have fun with this. So one of the biggest issues that we had to address was that there wasn't enough contrast between the lightest gray and the darkest gray, dividing up the categories. And so what was happening was it kind of just all looked like they were all part of one single column of information, which was not actually the case. It was supposed to be these rows. And so we changed that in the new version by adding lines and keeping the background color the same for the entire thing, instead of trying to use the background color, the different grays, to distinguish between them. What other issues do you see as potential problems? Deanna, I see your hand raised.
I wrote in the text. The white text is hard to see in that light gray.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think the light green with the gray is definitely blending in too. There's not a contrast in that.
Mm-hmm.
And the type size. I mean, it's the font size is not, I don't think it's big enough in all areas, possibly.
Yeah.
For me, it's a little hard to read the text when it's over a number.
Yeah.
I doesn't know which one to concentrate on.
Yeah. There's something in the chat. Let's see. The white text, yeah. So I'll show you the new version. It's not perfect. I still see things on it that I want to change, but it is an improvement, and I'm going to tell you what happened when I ran it through some of the checkers. So this is the newest version of it that we have. So the colors did change, right? So we went from green to red and this like teal, and darker text on a lighter background. It's kind of personal preference, actually, how that works out. When I took Michael Duggan's class a few summers ago, there was somebody that was talking about visual impairments, and her preference was a dark background with a light text. She had her documents sort of formatted, like her word was set up so that it showed that the actual document was black and the text was white. My preference is the opposite, right? I prefer a white background and a black text, but I also keep my font fairly large when I'm like drafting. So that might be why. So we switched it in this new version. I can tell you when I ran this through, I put it in the color blindness checker, right? And I turned on all the different ones just to kind of see what it would do. And then I ran it through, like I turned it grayscale, and the second column or the second row where it had the 2 spaces versus the 1 space, those numbers in the original version completely disappeared. You couldn't see them at all in the grayscale version. You also couldn't see any of the text in the first column or the first row. The running head with the shortened title, no running head required. You couldn't see that. It completely disappeared when it went grayscale. And so that's important, right? That text was important, even though I'm particularly proud of the graphics in that row, right? The running head thing. It needed some explanation, and that text needed to be able to be read. And so when we moved it to the new palette, you can see it's in darker text. The font size hasn't changed. I think it might be a little bit bigger in the new version, but I find it a lot easier to read, even though the size hasn't changed significantly on that side. And I think it does have to do mostly with contrast and the changes to that. So that was a good lesson to learn. All of those grays, like I said, when I went into color blindness or when I changed it to grayscale, all kind of just, it was so muddy. There was no distinction between any of those rows. And so you had 2 spaces after a period, and you couldn't see the 2 behind it. And then Times New Roman all looked like it was part of the same, like, sort of statement. And then the he, she, they, and those graphics were also fading out in grayscale as well. So higher contrast sort of did make a huge difference for this one. It makes it much more readable. And like I said, I don't love the design element of the lines. It's not my favorite, but it needed to be there. And that is something that I have found happening a lot for me, is that I'm kind of having to make compromises to make it work, right? So while it might not always be the best, like, or my favorite design choice, making that choice will allow more people to access the information, and that's really the point of it. And so I can kind of like sacrifice that piece of it, right? Like my own personal preferences, in order to make sure that the information that I need to be conveyed is being conveyed, right? This is true of like color palettes too, right? Like there's color palettes that I use that I don't particularly love, but I have to do it because otherwise you can't see what you need to see on the page. So I have one more real life example. It's quilting related, so I apologize. I'm working on this quilt. It's like rainbows, right? And pots of gold. And there's these clouds kind of at the ends of the rainbow, right? So I had this, like these teal fabrics pulled for it. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so cute. They're going to be like these little blue clouds. And then I realized that you couldn't see them if you put them with the fabric that I picked for the sky, right? So it would look like these rainbows kind of like floating in space, and then these weird sort of like blobby things at the bottom of them. There was no distinction between the color of the clouds and the color of the background. And so I had to do a left turn, and now my clouds are white. But that happened. These are choices that I'm making all the time as a quilter. Like I'm constantly thinking about how a fabric is going to stand out from another fabric, and there's nothing worse than finishing a whole quilt and realizing like an entire thing has disappeared because the contrast was off and you can't see it now anymore. So yeah, don't do that. Don't make the whole quilt and then realize that you've gotten the contrast wrong. And what's nice about like Canva and any of these, right, is that you have editing abilities infinitely, right? So you can just constantly be tweaking it. It's a blessing and a curse too, because then you'll constantly be tweaking it and trying to find a better route. So yeah.
We do have a question for you.
Okay.
Have you run across any recommendations regarding the accessibility of vertical text?
Vertical meaning like the text is like turned 90 degrees?
Yes.
Yeah. I haven't, but I assume it's not accessible. I assume. I mean, I do it in the APA one. But it's just like broad categories. And that's the thing too, right? Is like, I can know kind of instinctually, like for me, it's hard, right? Because I feel like I turn my head to read it, and that can't be the most helpful thing. But I also know that like, I'm not putting super important information in that format. And so I can kind of like deal with it, I guess, or just I say it's not worth like whatever. I can also go ahead, Deanna.
Are you talking about the word format going up the side? Because I have to say that was so easy to read.
Yeah.
And
it's the
I think
boldest
that's
font, right? It's the
yeah,
boldest
you
size,
compensated it being vertical by having that dark background and the really big type.
Yeah, I haven't read anything about it or recommendations against it. Like I said, my assumption just from like being a viewer in the world is that it's probably less accessible than horizontal text, just because like that's how we're conditioned to read things. But I think if you're using it as sort of like a benchmark, right? Like, or sort of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a heading, right? That it would probably be okay, but I wouldn't put anything like super important or more than like a few words moving vertically. The thing with like infographics is that they're sized so strangely, right? Like there's the ratio, like the skinny sort of long document size makes that vertical space like important, right? So you have to be able to use it in some way. And especially if you have like long words, it doesn't always fit widthwise in the size font that you need. And so if you do have to turn it, just make sure it's, you know, sort of limited.
So guys, if I could just continue to talk a little bit about the process here. It looks like most people besides Bridget, but she's probably multitasking from math, but she might find this interesting because she's not taken the Ally course yet. I want to just sort of show you, and Kim, I think I answered your question about, did I answer your question, Kim? I hope so. Oh, I know. So I wanted to show you in Blackboard what we have done. You might not know that Blackboard has changed its look. Oh no, I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to quick links, going to Blackboard. You can all see this, right? Okay. And I'm going to sign in. So the big changes to Blackboard that you will notice is that the options are now listed on the left side of the page as opposed to the top of the page. And your courses will still be in the same spot. So here's the self-guided Blackboard course that you could always go back to, right? And here's our WRSA, we call it a sandbox when you're talking about learning management system. So it's a place for us to play. So you're all players in this course. What we did is this link over here is the old Ally project that we did last January. We created the Learning Commons new Ally project here. And what you'll see is a place to upload your Word doc to see how accessible that is. So you can see that Jenny originally uploaded the accessibility statement and got a medium score. And as you recall, Ally will tell you what they suggest you do to improve it. And then she had to do something with her headings. It tells you how to head headings, etc. And she went ahead and made those changes. And then she went ahead and re-uploaded it and got a better score that was in Word. So then the second time she got the better score. When you do, so there's my English meet and greet script that I talked about that I made accessible. Elise did one on best practices. So this is where you will upload your completed Word document to get an Ally score and to kind of dive deeper into where you're at and what Ally suggests you change. Obviously, listen to what Word suggests you change. Look at those links that are on that one-page document to help you. If you have any tips to share, we welcome them. This is where you would upload your infographic. Again, you can use the old infographic from 2 years ago and just revise that, or your old academic poster. Glynis went to a conference and she bought Juan Carlos poster on mini module data, and we ran it through Ally and it got a medium score. So we had to make changes to some of the things in Juan Carlos poster. So feel free to use this every time you create something. Same thing with your accessible PowerPoint. I created one on stylistic devices. Elise created one on maybe animals or something, dogs or cats.
Three tips for helping shelter animals.
Okay, so feel free to watch that or just know it's there. And then when it comes time for the video link, there's a different way to, let me review if you don't remember. So let's say we're doing our Word document. You go to build content to add it, and then you go to file, and then you name it, and then you browse your file, and you look on your desktop, and then you just hit submit here and it gets uploaded, and you give it just a few minutes, and then you get an Ally score. Okay, but when it comes to the YouTube video with closed captioning, you see it's got a little link here. You're not going to choose file. You're going to choose web link. And when you choose web link, you'll name it, and then you'll put your URL in and submit it. And then that's just where it will be stored. You don't get an accessibility score in Blackboard for a web link. But we want all of your documents all in one spot so that when we get together in August to discuss these, you know where they are, where you put it, and you can remember your Ally score, what it told you to change, and it can be part of a meaningful discussion then. So that's how we are using Blackboard to upload our revisions. Again, no question is silly. Anytime along the way you have one. You get the idea that Kate is very well versed in this. Jessica is done with this project. Arena, who is not here today, she actually learned how to make closed captioning in Russian. So, we're just, and we didn't know how to do it, but we're just continually learning. So we're creating, how do you register for a WRSA account in Russian video? So we got a Russian keyboard. We're doing it in Arabic and we're doing it in Spanish. So we now know how to do that type of closed captioning as well.
I'd just like to add to that, in terms of like the contrast checking, Kim has been doing a lot of really beautiful marketing pieces for us where she has had to check the contrast and work with different color palettes. So Kim would also be another good resource for contrast questions.
Yeah, for sure. She's got a great graphic design chip in her body. So yes. So so I feel like we've kind of done the general overview, why we're doing it, why it's important, talked about some quick tips, talked about the process itself in OneDrive and the process itself in Blackboard. Are there any immediate questions that you have?
I have a question.
Sure, Kim.
Maybe this is obvious, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless. When we talk about low vision, I'm just curious about the definition. Are we talking about everything from someone with maybe uncorrected nearsightedness or farsightedness to blindness, or everything in between?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know that answer.
Do you want me to?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't see you there. I was
Yes,
looking for you. I'm like, Jenny left.
Yeah, it is. Low vision is considered on a continuum, like you were saying, but it has to be to the point where it impacts everyday activities. So generally, that's kind of what they're looking at. It's a continuum, and it can encompass a number of different types of vision concerns, but it's to the point where it impacts everyday activities, but it's not to the point of blindness.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Other questions? No question is silly. So yeah, so this is going to be, you guys did it once, so you know that it's something that we have to wrestle with. And sometimes even get frustrated or scared. Because Elise and I felt it. We're like, oh, and it wasn't as bad as we thought. And I still have a ton to learn because it's kind of one of those things that you have to do often to get right, Jessica. Jess is doing a lot of our behind the scenes stuff, and she's just very fast at it, and it's just so natural to her, and Kate. And so it's less natural to me, but what's not less natural is the importance of it, right? And that of course we want to serve even just one student, right? So, okay, Elise put the definition from NEI.NIH. Thank you. Other questions about either why we're doing it or the process itself? Okay, so we're working on this through the remaining of the fiscal year, June 30th. Anytime you have downtime, be looking at those links, be figuring out which document you want to either create or revise. Don't start from scratch. I don't think it's necessary. Just learn how to make it accessible, especially if it's a Word document that we use in WRSA, right? Or in the Learning Commons. And then kind of get started, and then do it during downtime. And like I said, I think we will have Accessibility Palooza come May, and I'll give you an opportunity to kind of finish up, fill out your tip thing. I did actually want to share and ask one other question that I think could be helpful for the whole group. Kate, in looking at your chart and your tips, I see on the Word document link, one of your tips for doing this in the future is to set your heading format right away. In other words, to right-click, updating heading to match selection. For me, as someone who hasn't started, I wonder if you could demonstrate what that means. Is she still here?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, I thought
I
maybe
can
you
try.
left.
I am currently fighting with an old version of Word.
Okay, no worries. You look at that and put a pin in it, and I'm just going to keep sort of talking about your tips here.
Okay.
Because you're going to be like, maybe you'll get there and you'll be like, Margaret, what tips do we write? Well, you can always look at Kate's. Anything, and the reason that I made you your own separate chart is because I don't care if it's a duplicate with somebody else's. If it's a duplicate, that means it's a good tip, right? And so whatever, like once you do that Word doc, if you're like, I should have done this from the beginning, or this would have made life easier for me, or using this type of process makes it more seamless, put it there. So Kate has this one thing that I'm not quite sure I understand, so I wondered if she could demonstrate. She does say for her second tip, find non-visual ways to add emphasis. In other words, you need to know that screen readers don't read italics, bold, or caps. So Kate, what would be another non-visual way besides?
Sorry, I'm trying to see it on my screen. I can't. So I'm leaning in non-visual.
Here, I can make it bigger.
Thank you.
So these two, like,
yeah, so
I think it'd be good if you talked about your tips. Yeah.
Okay, so some of this came up when I was working on transcripts. This one, and then one of the main tips that I have in PowerPoint came up when I was working on transcripts because I didn't realize how often I was doing it and how often the rest of us were doing it. So a lot of times I will use like all caps. And this is like informal writing, right? But I would use all caps for like emphasis, right? I do it a lot in texting too. And the screen reader doesn't read it as like all caps and then tell you the word. And so I really found myself thinking just like a little bit more critically about if I really needed to emphasize it or if just by virtue of like it being in the sentence or where it was positioned within the sentence was emphasis enough. Usually that was the case. But I found that I just found that I was doing it often. And so a lot of times I would rearrange or rewrite the sentence so that whatever I needed to be emphasized was like in the proper position within the sentence. So either early in the sentence or, whatever creatively I wanted to do with the text. But yeah, I was kind of like horrified when I looked at like a document that had as many caps or italics or things like that I needed it to have. And I don't know if that's my screen reader or if it's all screen readers, but when I was running transcripts and finding that to be the case, it was not reading it on mine. So sometimes you'd have to do like a parenthesis kind of like if you really needed to emphasize, especially within speaker notes and things like that. And that was the other thing in PowerPoint, right? We often say in our PowerPoint like speaker notes, like let's take a look at, and then referring to something on the slide, right? Which doesn't work if you can't see it, number one, right? But number two, definitely doesn't work in a transcript where like the expectation is not that they have the slide right next to them, right? They might, but they probably don't. If you're reading a true transcript, it doesn't have that with it. So I found myself proofreading that out, right? Or editing that out in a lot of transcripts. And it's just something to kind of consider, like how are we referring to the things that we're looking at on the slide? And is there a way to refer to it without truly, is there a way to talk about it without having to have the visual cue there to make it make sense? So yeah, that was a big one. I saw that we say it a lot, right? Like, let's take a look at, or we can see here, things like
Guilty. Totally guilty. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at it's my own speaker notes too for a lot of them, and I do it all the time.
So as you're creating your Word doc link, if you want to look at Kate's tips ahead of time and ask her questions, or Jessica, like I hope they don't care, but I'm making them like kind of the experts because they are. Feel free to do it. And just like I said, anything that's helpful here. If you can't think of any, that's totally fine, but we're all learning. So I would venture to say, one or two things would be great.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
For the video, for the closed captioning, I just feel like everybody needs to be prepared for this to be the most time consuming task on your list. It took way longer than and this is because I hadn't done it before, right? So I'm sure Jess is a lot faster at it. A lot. I hope she's a lot faster at it because it takes me forever. But I did a very short video. I had a script for it. So I was reading from a script, and it still took me forever to do those, to format those captions, right? So even though I had most of it, I didn't upload, I think, because I didn't have a true script. And so I just did it like, sort of had it auto generate, but there was no punctuation, and it picks up on all of the insecurities that you have about saying and like and whatever else. It finds all of that, and you have to like deal with it in that system. And so that one just took a lot more time than I anticipated it would. And so that's just something I feel like people should know ahead of time, is like, maybe don't put that one off to be last.
Jess offered to demonstrate.
It can be done during Palooza because it could be done from home.
Okay.
If you're doing a video, that might be helpful. I think the other ones could be done at the desk.
Yeah, but Kate, to your point, I agree with you, but also that was the most fun for me.
It was fun, right?
It's like I enjoy doing the closed captionings, and I know I've already sent it to a few people, but I cannot sing high enough praises for Jess's video on that, in that area, because I watched it right before I did mine. And I was anticipating feeling lost and having to go back and replay sections of the video and stop and pause and do this and that. I did not feel lost once after watching Jess's video. So
yeah,
you have to watch that video. And then I think yes, it's time consuming, but it's also fun. And like,
right.
We're lifelong learners, and we love learning something new and applying it. And that's how I felt. And after I was done, I was like, I told my husband, I'm like, guess what I did today? I had closed captionings to a YouTube video. And he just kind of looked at me like, but yeah, it's time
consuming, but it's not hard. I think
it's not. And it's fun.
Can we have Jess demonstrate? She offered to.
Oh,
Well,
just
it's in the
demonstrate.
video. It's in the video. It's an 8-minute video.
Oh, okay,
headings
but she just
thing.
offered to demonstrate headings in the chat, and I didn't know if anyone saw.
Oh, I thought you were talking about closed captioning.
No,
Yeah.
the
No.
tip
I'm sorry, I
that
missed
you
that.
asked about, Margaret.
Go ahead, Jess. Oh, let me make you a co-host, Jess. Hang on.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you, Jess, because my word is fighting with me.
Sorry,
Andrew, to
JP,
answer
and I
your
didn't
question,
see
I
that.
wasn't editing out the verbal or the vocalized pauses. I was just having to like punctuate them, right? Which is just complicated, right? To like punctuate or bracket or parentheses, an or a like or things like that. It would really mess with, I think, the timing of it too. If you edited them out in the caption,
Right.
I don't think it would match the audio then. At a certain point, you're going to get ahead of yourself. So I wasn't editing them out completely, and Jess has a response to that too, right? That you want the captions to be as close to what is actually being said as possible, and so it's better to leave them in. So I
Cool,
did,
thanks.
but
Yeah,
I was just punctuating them.
sure.
It's humbling. It's humbling to punctuate your own ums, let me tell you.
Okay, Jess, you can take over.
All right, yeah, so for this update heading to match selection thing with setting the heading format right away, so let me go to Word. Yeah, let's see. So in your Word document, when you're doing something and you want to have your headings, and we have heading 1 here, and you're thinking, oh yeah, okay, so I want my headings to be size 14 and bold. And so then later on, you're writing in your normal font and stuff, and then you want another heading. Instead of being like, okay, change everything and all of that. So what you do is you just highlight this. This is how you want it, size 14 bold. You go to heading 1 now, and you right click on it, update heading 1 to match selection. And you want heading 2 to be size 12, but it's also in bold. So that way then later on, you have your normal text, but you want another heading 2 now. This will be, you can highlight it, heading 2, update heading 2 to match selection. So then we want another heading 2. You just highlight it, and then you just select your heading 2. It keeps things consistent. So if you set that at the beginning, and just that's how you do it, is that left click and update heading 2 to match selection. So you can just do it the first time, and then it'll be consistent throughout the document.
So you want your second heading to be smaller than the first one, than heading 1? Is that? The font's different size. That's why I'm confused though, with your headings.
Yeah, if you want to do that, then that's how it would be. Sometimes
Okay.
everything in a document will be all just size 12, but then that's fine too. But I was just like demonstrating how if you wanted it to be different sizes and stuff. We just want to, again, make sure that heading 1 is the title of the document, and heading 2 and below that are the headings within the document itself. Like this is our title technically. So if you wanted to center that, but font sizes, whatever you want to do, it's just you use these options and to make them consistent throughout.
I think
both
too, like
visually and
this is
software.
like a drafting preference as well, right? So for some people, they just sort of draft and then they do all their formatting at the end, and other people format as they go. And so I'm a format as I go kind of person. And so like I can't handle it not having like, the heading and like what, like I want it all set up before I start working on something, even if I'm in a rough draft. And so for me, this makes sense, right? That I'm going to set my headings. I'm going to get everything formatted the way I need it to be before I ever start it. For other people, it makes sense to do it after the fact, right? So to go back in and add their headings and reformat their headings after they've drafted the entire thing. Some people wait and do it at the very, very end, like when it's like final draft. I think that's more of a preference than it is like a, good practice or something like that. I think it's just whatever makes sense for you and your writing style.
I think I think Anne's question was about, there's your first heading and then your second heading and your third heading, and that's not what these are, right? These are levels of heading, like you would do for an outline. Is that right, Jess? So heading 1 is going to be, like you said, the title. Heading 2, you might have 5 heading 2s, right? In terms of size. And then if you have an indent, if you have a subheading under heading 2, you're going to do heading 3. Am I understanding that correctly? Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah,
like
they're
I
not
could-
gonna read heading 1, heading 2. It's gonna be other text, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
if you look at the accessibility statement.
Yes.
When she first put this in Ally, it's like you don't have headings correct. Because she just typed it the way she knew how to type a Word document. So she went back, this is what they call heading 1. This is what they call heading 2. It does make it a smaller font. This is also heading 2, right? This is also heading 2. So that's how the digital reader will read it. It knows that those are all heading 2s and that is their importance in the document. Make sense? Okay. How about we stop recording and we take a 5-minute break and we come back at about 10:42 and we